field of activities in every individual body. The individual may be the knower of his own body, but he is not in knowledge of other bodies. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is present as the Supersoul in all bodies, knows everything about all bodies. He knows all the different bodies of all the various species of life. A citizen may know everything about his patch of land, but the king knows not only his palace, but all the properties possessed by the individual citizens. Similarly, one may be the proprietor of the body individually, but the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of all bodies. The king is the original proprietor of the kingdom, and a citizen is the secondary proprietor. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is the supreme proprietor of all bodies. The body consists of the senses. The Supreme Lord is Hrishikesha, which means the controller of the senses. He is the original controller of the senses, just as the king is the original controller of all the activities of the state. The citizens are secondary controllers. The Lord says, I am also the knower. This means that he is the super knower. The individual soul knows only his particular body. In the Vedic literature, it is stated as follows: Setrani pi sarirani bijam chapi subha sube tani veti sayogatma tata chetra gya uchyate. Uchyate, yeah. This body is called the Chetra, and within it dwells the owner of the body and the Supreme Lord, who knows both the body and the owner of the body. Therefore, he is called the owner of all fields. The distinction between the field of activities, the knower of activities, and the supreme knower of activities is described as follows: perfect knowledge of the constitution of the body, the constitution of the individual soul, and the constitution of the super soul is known in terms of Vedic literature as jnana. That is the opinion of Krishna. To understand both the soul and the super soul as one yet distinct is knowledge. One who does not understand the field of activity and the knower of activity is not in perfect knowledge. One has to understand the position of Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer of nature, and Ishvara, the knower who dominates or controls nature, and the individual soul. One should not confuse the three in their different capacity. One should not confuse the painter, the painting, and the easel. This material world, which is the field of activities, is nature, and the enjoyer of nature is the living entity, and above them both is the supreme controller, the personality of Godhead. It is stated in the Vedic language in the Sritasvatara Upanishad 1.12. Bhokta bhogyam parittaram cha madhva sarvam proktam trividham brahman etat. There are three Brahman conceptions. Prakriti is Brahman as the field of activities. The jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman, but he is the factual controller. Okay, so you have three conceptions of Brahman. The material nature or Prakriti as the field of activities is Brahman. And the Jiva, the individual soul, is also Brahman as the field of activities. Jiva is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman. But he, meaning the Supreme Personality Godhead, is the factual controller. In this chapter, it will also be explained that out of the two knowers, one is fallible and the other is infallible. So fallible means you can make mistakes. Infallible means there's no mistake. One is superior and the other is subordinate. Yeah, so Krishna is superior and the living entity is subordinate. One who understands the two knowers of the field to be one and the same contradicts the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who states here very carefully, I am also the knower of the field of activity. So, what does that mean? That means that one who understands the two knowers of the field to be one and the same contradicts the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So you cannot say that the living entity is equal to Krishna. The living entity is always going to be subordinate to Krishna. Therefore, Krishna's position is unique, and the living entity's position is always subordinate to Krishna. In this chapter, it will also be explained that out of the two knowers, one is fallible, that means the living entities, and the other is infallible, that means Krishna. One is superior, that's Krishna, and the other is subordinate, the living entities. One who understands the two knowers of the field to be one and the same contradicts the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah, so the living entity is never the same as Krishna. And Krishna is always superior and the living entity is always inferior. I am also the knower of the field of activity. Okay. One who misunderstands a rope to be a serpent is not in knowledge. There are different kinds of bodies, and there are, different owners of the bodies. Because each individual soul has this individual capacity for lording it over material nature, there are different bodies. But the Supreme, in other words, Supreme Personality of Godhead, also is present in them as the controller. Yeah, Krishna is in the heart of every living entity. That can be bugs, that can be snakes, that can be elephants, etc. He's in everybody's body as the overseer. But the Supreme also is present in them as the controller. The word cha is significant, for it indicates the total number of bodies. That is the opinion of Srila Baladeva Vidyabhushana. Krishna is the supreme present in each. Krishna is the supreme present in each and every body, apart from the individual soul. And Krishna explicitly says here that the super soul is the controller of both the field of activities and the finite enjoyer. Okay, so in other words, you have nature, you have the living entity, and you have the Supreme Personality of God. Three things. Okay, so that's why it says, and Krishna explicitly says here that the super soul is the controller of both the field of activities and the finite enjoyer. Okay. So you have Krishna, you have the material nature, and you have the individual living entities. Text 4. Tachetram yachcha yadrikcha yad vikari yataschayat sacha yo yata prabhavascha tat samasena me shrinu. Now please hear my brief description of this field of activity and how it is constituted, what its changes are, whence it is produced, who that knower of the field of activities is, and what his influences are. Well, now you're going to have a full explanation of the field of activity. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Lord is describing the field of activities and the knower of the field of activities in their constitutional positions. Okay, whenever it says constitutional position, that means what a person is destined to be. Like, for example, I may be destined to be a human being. That's my constitutional position, right? So here it says, one has to know how this body is constituted, the material of which this body is made, under whose control this body is working, how the changes are taking place, where from the changes are coming, what the causes are, what the reasons are, what the ultimate goal of the individual soul is, and what the actual form of the individual soul is. One should also know the distinction between the individual living soul and the supersoul, their different influences, their potentials, etc. One just has to understand this Bhagavad Gita directly from the description given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and all this will be clarified. But one should be careful not to consider the Supreme Personality of Godhead in everybody to be one with the individual soul, the jiva. No, the jiva is always subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The jiva is never equal to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is something like equating the potent and the impotent. So, in other words, we don't want to make a mistake. We don't want to say that the jiva is the same as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. No. Supreme Personality of Godhead has all potencies, and the living entities have very limited potency. Text number 5. Rishabir Bahuda Gitam Chando Bir Vividai Pritak Brahma Sutra Padaishchaiva Hetamad Bir Vinichita Vinichitai. That knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of the activities is described by various sages in various Vedic writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra with all reasonings as to cause and effect. Very important verse. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the highest authority in explaining this knowledge. Still, as a matter of course, learned scholars and standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Okay, now that's a very important statement. What is it? The standard authorities always give evidence from previous authorities. Krishna is explaining this most controversial point regarding the duality and non-duality of the soul and the supersoul by referring to a scripture, the Vedanta, which is accepted as authority. First, he says, meaning first Krishna says, this is according to different sages. As far as the sages are concerned, besides himself, meaning Krishna, Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra, is a great sage, and in the Vedanta Sutra, duality is perfectly explained. And Vyasadeva's father, Parashara, is also a great sage, and he writes in his books of religiosity, Aham Tvam, one second. Oh boy. Second. Aham Tvam Tathanye. We dash you, I, and the various other living entities are all transcendental, although in material bodies. Now, we are fallen into the ways of the three modes of material nature, according to our different karma. As such, some are on higher levels and some are in the lower levels, nature. The higher and lower natures exist due to ignorance and are being manifested in an infinite number of living entities. But the supersoul, which is infallible, meaning cannot make any mistake, is uncontaminated by the three qualities of nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, and is transcendental. Similarly, in the original Vedas, a distinction between the soul, the supersoul, and the body is made, especially in the Katha Upanishad. There are many great sages who have explained this, and Parasara is considered principal among them. The word Chandogya refers to the various Vedic literatures. The Taittiriya Upanishad, for example, which is a branch of the Yajur Veda, describes nature, the living entity, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities, and there are two kinds of Kshetragya, meaning the knower of the field of activities, the individual living entity and the supreme living entity, or Krishna. As stated in the Taittiriya Upanishad 2.9, Brahma Pucham Pratistha. There is a manifestation of the Supreme Lord's energy known as Anamaya, dependence upon food for existence. This is a materialistic realization of the Supreme. Then, in Pranamaya, after realizing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Supreme Absolute Truth in food, one can realize the Absolute Truth in the living symptoms or life forms. In Jnanamaya, realization extends beyond the living symptoms to the point of thinking, feeling, and willing. Then there is Brahman realization, called Vijnanamaya, in which the living entity's mind and life symptoms are distinguished from the living entity himself. The next and supreme stage is Anandamaya, realization of the all blissful nature. Thus, there are 5 stages of Brahman realization, which are called Brahma Pucham. Out of these, the first 3, Anamaya, Pranamaya, and Jnanamaya, involve the fields of activities of the living entity. Transcendental to all these fields of activities is the Supreme Lord, who is called Anandamaya. The Vedanta Sutra also describes the Supreme by saying, Anandamayo Vyasat. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is by nature full of joy. To enjoy his transcendental bliss, he expands into Vijnanamaya, Pranamaya, Jnanamaya, and Anamaya. In the field of activities, the living entity is considered to be the enjoyer, and different from him is the Anandamaya. That means that if the living entity decides to enjoy and dovetailing himself with the Anandamaya, Ananda means transcendental happiness, then he becomes perfect. This is the real picture of the Supreme Lord as the supreme knower of the field, the living entity as the subordinate knower, and the nature of the field of activities. One has to search for this truth in the Vedanta Sutra or Brahma Sutra. Brahma Sutra is another name of Vedanta Sutra. It is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are, see, they use, sometimes they say Brahma Sutra, sometimes they say Vedanta Sutra, it's the same thing. It is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras or aphorisms, are transcendental, not transcendental, but they are truthful statements. But those statements are what you would call very succinct statements of truth. Okay, so some of the sutras or aphorisms are not Vyad Asrute. I'm sorry. Some of the sutras or aphorisms are Na Vidyad Asrute 2.3.2, Natma Shrute 2.3.18, and Paratu Touch Shrute 2.3.40. The first aphorism indicates the field of activities. The second indicates the living entity, and the third indicates the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum among all the manifestations of various entities. Okay, so in 3 or 4 different ways, it's talking about the same thing. For example, when it says, that knowledge of the field of activities and of the knower of the activities is described by various sages in various writings. It is especially presented in Vedanta Sutra, with all reasoning as to cause and effect. So, therefore, so just in that verse, which is text 5, you have the field of activities, the knower of activities, and you have the Vedic writings or Vedic scriptures. Okay. Then, again, you have another set of 3s, which says, yeah, it says, as stated before, Kshetra is the field of activities. And there are 2 kinds of Kshetragya, that means knower of the field of activities, the individual living entity and the supreme entity. Okay, so that's another set of 3. And then it says, then it says, it is mentioned here that the codes of the Brahma Sutra are very nicely arranged according to cause and effect. Some of the sutras or aphorisms are Na Vidyad Asrute. And then another one is Natma Shrute. And then another one is Paratu Touch Shrute. Again, three different ways of understanding the Brahma Sutras. So the first aphorism indicates the field of activities, the second indicates the living entity, and the third indicates the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum among all the manifestations of various entities. Okay, so in 3 or 4 different ways, you have this three-pronged, what you would call statements of the truth. Okay, so now let's go to text 6 and 7. Now, actually, I think our time is up. So we'll go over this again tomorrow because I want to say a few more words about it. Are there any questions or comments? Are there any questions or comments? So tomorrow we'll start by text number 5 again.
So Maharaj,
Yeah.
Hare Krishna. So Maharaj, in the previous verse, we saw there is
Text
like
3?
the previous I think that the soul is Brahman, the super soul is also Brahman, and then there is so all three, the Prakriti is also Brahman. So can you explain
The
like
three Brahman conceptions.
Three Brahman concepts.
Prakriti is Brahman as the field of activities.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman. But he is the factual controller. So you have here 3 things. The material nature is Brahman as the field of activities. It's where everything is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the Jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman, as who's trying to control the material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman, meaning Krishna is the controller of both of them, meaning the Jiva and the Prakriti. Prakriti means material nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jiva means you and me, individuals. And then the Supreme Personality Godhead is the supreme controller, or the personality of Godhead. It is stated in Vedic language in the Sritasvatara Upanishad 1.12. There are 3 Brahman conceptions. Okay, Brahman means, it's going to explain 3 Brahman conceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prakriti, or material nature, is Brahman, as the field of activities.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's one. And the Jiva, the individual soul, is also Brahman. And is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them, meaning Krishna, is also Brahman. But he is the factual controller. So what does Brahman mean? It is a controller. But there's 3 levels of controllers here. You have Prakriti, the material nature. You have the Jiva, that's us. And then you have Krishna, the supreme controller. There are 3 Brahman conceptions. Prakriti is Brahman as the field of activities. The Jiva, individual soul, is also Brahman and is trying to control material nature. And the controller of both of them is also Brahman, but he is the factual controller. All right, so when we say Brahman, Brahman has several different definitions. It usually refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but it can also refer to very powerful individuals. And it can also refer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah. So sometimes it can also refer to a very powerful person. So you have a very powerful person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and then Prakriti, the material nature. So those three things are referred to as Brahman.
Yeah.
Okay. So in other words, this Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer of nature, and Ishvara, the knower who dominates or controls nature and the individual soul. So you see these three words are explaining in different ways. Like for example, these are sets of three.
Mm-hmm.
You have in one set is Prakriti and Purusha and Ishvara. Then another set is 1 second. Um, One second. Where is it? Okay, I'm going to have to explain this tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah.
So one set of three is Prakriti, Purusha, Ishvara. Prakriti is nature, Purusha is the enjoyer of nature, and Ishvara, the knower who dominates or controls nature and the individual soul. Okay. One should not confuse the three in their different capacities. There it is. That's an important statement. One should not confuse the painter, the painting, and the easel. This material world, which is the field of activities, is nature, and the enjoyer of nature is the living entity. And above them, both, is the supreme controller, the personality of Godhead. Okay, so we'll stop right there. That, I think you understand that. I understand it also. You have the material nature, you have the living entity, and you have the supreme personality of God. Okay, and that is the what you would call Brahman, right? Now, Brahman can mean other things also, but in general, it refers to the material nature, the living entity, and the supreme personality of God. Okay, we'll stop right there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. All glories to
Krishna
Srila
Prabhupada.
And I am going to go to the temple now and chant
Hare
Hare Krishna.